Attention, citizens of Gotham. Are you tired? Feeling sluggish? Struggling to keep up with the caped crusaders in your life? Then you need the amazing Bat Tonic.
I used to stumble through my day like a confused henchman, but with the amazing Bat Tonic, I'm as vigilant as the Dark Knight himself. I can tackle any challenge, day or night.
That's right, folks. The amazing Bat Tonic is infused with the finest extracts from Wayne Enterprises' secret labs. Just one sip and you'll be ready to face the world with the cunning of a detective and the strength of a superhero. Perfect for fatigue, sluggishness, and those unexpected villain attacks. It's the tonic that turns any ordinary night into a bat night. Remember, with the amazing Bat Tonic, you're never alone in the dark. Available now at all reputable apothecaries in Gotham City and beyond. Only 25 cents a bottle, or $5 for $1. The amazing Bat Tonic is not FDA approved. Side effects may include heightened senses, nocturnal tendencies, and an irresistible urge to wear a cape. Use responsibly. The amazing Bat Tonic. Turn your ordinary nights into bat nights.
Welcome to this Moving Panels One Shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation. And in honor of the 2024 Olympics that is happening over the next few weeks, we're going to be diving into gold, silver, and bronze. But in the case of comics, we're talking about the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age of comics. And today we are starting with the era that laid the foundation for the entire comic industry. And of course, that is the Golden Age of comics. And joining me on all of these conversations, all three of them, is my good friend and someone who is always curious to learn more about comics. Please welcome Reece Fowler. How are you, Reece?
I'm doing well, Laramy. Thank you very much for having me. And yes, indeed, I am indeed curious about these three eras of comics.
That is awesome. So we're starting with the Golden Age, and I'm going to ask you some questions along the way, just to see what is your knowledge, because I really thought it would be good to have someone like you on here who has the interest, but not necessarily the vast knowledge that that many of my co-hosts do. No offense to you.
Hey,
I mean, you're
none taken. You're right. I don't follow the comic books especially. I do like comedy and a good funny movie and a good funny line every once in a while. But I'd like to learn more, and hopefully through these little one shots, I can gain some insight on the gold, silver, and bronze age of comics.
Well, here we go. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So, just to be clear, this is not a history of comics, because comics in their comic strip form and kind of the drawing to tell a story. I mean, you can go all the way back and hundreds of years going back.
For sure.
When we talk about the gold, silver, and bronze age of comics, we are talking about the key moments that actually changed the industry. And the Golden Age is the one that essentially established what we know as comic books would be. Do you know? Well, actually, let me just say. So I will go ahead and tell you this. The Golden Age of comics stretches from the late 1930s into 1950.
All right.
So it was early 1950s was when Golden Age ends and Silver Age begins. So do you know what is considered the start of the Golden Age?
I don't know exactly what it would be. If I had to guess, I would say it probably is somewhere along the lines of Action Comics. Maybe Superman was the first comic book. I have no idea.
You look at that. See, Okay. That's right on.
Only because I know you.
Yeah, but just because I'm a Superman fan doesn't mean that's why this is the beginning of the Golden Age.
Yeah, but
this is the beginning of the Golden Age.
That is the oldest one I can think of, though. So, yay.
Yeah, and again, that's what we're talking about.
Point for me.
When people think comic books, really there weren't a collection of stories the way that it was done until we hit this Golden Age. So April 18th, 1938 is the official beginning of comic books with Action Comics #1. Of course, the debut of Superman, created by 24-year-old Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were 24
I had no
when
idea.
they created them.
That's amazing. And look at the empire they've created.
Oh, my goodness. Now, that's another thing. Again, not going to do the history. There's a lot to talk about, even just among the way Siegel and Shuster handled, because it's partly their fault, but the way they were treated is a bigger issue. in terms of being the creators of essentially the entire comic book industry.
Awesome.
But yeah, Superman was unlike anything readers had ever seen before, because he was, there's some argument to this, but he essentially was the first superhero. There's the arguments about Mandrake the Magician, which if you go way back in our archives, I have a whole series where I talk about him.
Right.
There are some elements of a character like the Phantom that some people say he technically should be a superhero, but Superman does usually hold that title if he was the first superhero. That because Superman had extraordinary powers, he had a strong moral code, which is where characters maybe like the Phantoms, you start to lose them a little bit.
Right.
And his powers weren't magical like Mandrake, and they weren't something that was bestowed upon him, which is the way the Phantom works. He was an alien who, because of his genetics, that being here on Earth gave him the powers. Actually, let's talk about his planet.
Okay.
Of course, you know that Superman is from what planet?
Krypton.
But did you know that even though they discuss the planet in Action Comics #1, it is not referred to by name?
Wow. So, okay. How do we come to the conclusion that he is from Krypton?
So that wasn't established until 1939 when Superman got his own title. And it was Superman #1.
Okay.
And that is when they officially gave the name Krypton as his planet. It was also the first time we're introduced to the Kents. So it wasn't until the following year, after Superman debuts,
right,
that we get the storyline about the Kents finding him and adopting him.
Okay.
Are you at all aware of what his origin story is in Action Comics #1?
No, I have no clue about where he came from in Action Comics #1. No.
So in Action Comics #1, they really kind of explain that all of his race on the planet that he is have his abilities, even on the planet.
Right.
So that wasn't exactly what we're used to. If they're on Krypton because they had a red sun, they didn't have any powers. It's being underneath a yellow sun that gives them their powers, and so on.
Right.
But also in Action Comics #1, after he is, sent with the rocket ship, he comes to Earth, he crashes down, and is just this passing motorist, just this random dude that finds him and takes him to an orphanage.
Okay.
And the funny thing is at the orphanage, as like a baby, he's demonstrating his powers. Like there's a shot of him just like lifting up the crib one-handed. And everybody in the orphanage sees it.
Yeah.
So
how is this baby doing that?
But this was... let me ask you another question.
Okay.
Again, I'm just curious to see what you do and do not know.
All right.
So Action Comics #1 was not released by DC because DC did not exist yet.
Correct.
Are you aware of the name of the company?
No. I do not know what they were called. No.
All right. So they were called National Allied Publications.
And now I know.
Yeah. And of course, they'd later become DC, which was the name of, funny enough, the comic book that Batman would come from, Detective Comics. That's what the DC, because that was their most popular book at the time when they made the name change.
Right.
But it wasn't obvious to National Allied Publications that it was Superman that caused the boom they saw in the sales with Action Comics #1. Because the Superman story, even though everybody associates it with Action Comics #1, I mean, he's on the cover. So
yes,
I don't think people know, and you may not even know, that wasn't the only story in this comic book.
No, I did not know that. What other stories do we have other than Superman?
I mean, there were some random ones. There's really nothing to focus on. But yeah, Superman, it was a 64-page comic, and the Superman story is only 13 of those 64 pages.
All right.
But again, it was, I mean, that's the way comics kind of were. Comic magazines, I think, was more what they referred to before they became comic books. They were anthologies. So they were just these short little stories that different artists and creators would do, and they would put them all together, and they would sell the anthology comic, as it would.
Okay.
But yeah, 13 pages, and we get the birth of what we consider the modern comic book.
Wow.
In your opinion, what do you think it was, though, about Superman and the character of Superman that made him so revolutionary here in the 1938, 1939.
Well, you're talking about Depression era time. You're not far away from that episode or that event in our history, and probably people were just drawn to it because they wish they had those powers.
Yeah, I think that 100%. I think he represented the ideal hero. He had those powers, and like you said, with the Great Depression and all, I mean, in the 1930s, people wanted hope. They wanted inspiration,
and that's something that Superman was able to provide.
100%.
Even if you're just living it vicariously, you can still see a better future.
And no matter what came in his way, like Superman would overcome any obstacle. I 100% agree.
Thank you.
We already mentioned this. Following Superman, we get other characters. Of course, Detective Comics introduces Batman in 1939. Quick trivia question. Do you know the names of the creators of Batman?
I do not.
Okay. So he is created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Again, not going to do the history lesson about how Bill Finger did not get the recognition he deserved as a creator of Batman until really just a decade or so ago.
Okay.
But yeah, so Bob Kane and Bill Finger. And of course, Batman was a little different. We just talked about Superman being, idealistic, being optimistic, hope, inspiration. Whereas Batman, darker, he's more complex. Whereas Superman's pretty, especially this version of Superman, was very, just straightforward. There's black and there's white. With Batman, there was more complex in terms of he was a good guy, but kind of portrayed as a bad guy. And a very stark difference between Batman and Superman.
Yes, a lot of gray area in there for Batman to go one way or the other, I guess.
Yeah. And this early version of Batman carried a gun.
Nope, didn't know that.
He had a gun on his side. The utility belt was just a gun. That's what it was way back.
Wow.
In the day. Do you know any other characters that were introduced around this time? Or want to guess?
I was going to say guess. I mean,
you
you have Batman. Was Robin associated with him at that time, or did he come along much later?
He would come in during the Golden Age, yeah, but it would be a little while later, not immediately.
Where does Wonder Woman fall into this line?
There we go. That's probably your next big one. Of course, I would say Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They of course are called the Trinity. They pretty much are the the beginning of it all. The three of them, and so yeah, you got Wonder Woman. You familiar with Plastic Man?
Maybe not so much as Plastic Man. Well, that's not the same thing as one of the Fantastic Four, though, right?
Well, he's got the same power. It's the same as Reed Richards,
okay.
Mr. Fantastic. Right. He's just a dude who can stretch and make his body conform to anything.
I want to say, I want to say back in the day there was a cartoon that we used to watch did have Plastic Man. Yeah, that was part of the Justice League cartoon era.
Well, he had his own. He had his own cartoon back in the day. There was a Plastic Man cartoon. So yeah,
possible.
You are correct.
Yep, there you go.
What about Dr. Fate?
Can't say that I've heard of Dr. Fate. No.
Okay, so Dr. Fate, which is pretty much DC's. For those of you, you're probably more familiar with Doctor Strange. Well, Dr. Fate would be DC's version, but of course, this is before Doctor Strange.
Right.
Again, some people will start to notice I'm probably about to only name a bunch of DC characters. And that's really just because we're still right here at the end of the 30s, beginning of the 40s. I mean, Marvel hadn't really got going yet. So Marvel doesn't really hit their stride until the Silver Age, to be honest. So yeah, about to mention a lot of DC characters here. So we got Dr. Fate also introduced during this time. Hawkman.
Right. I have
familiar with Hawkman?
Heard of Hawkman. Yes.
All right. What about... I mean, you have to know Green Arrow.
Oh, yeah. Green Arrow.
Yeah. Green Arrow, Aquaman.
I was going to throw that out there. I didn't know where he came in the line of gold or silver. Aquaman.
Nope, he's a Gold Age character.
Okay.
And then we have three characters that although you do recognize them, these were different versions of these characters. So it starts off with the Atom. So the Atom, you probably are familiar with. He's kind of like Ant-Man,
Right.
but again, DC's version. But at this time, he was a guy named Al Pratt, and he didn't have any powers. So the whole shrinking thing and all that wasn't a part of the Atom at this point.
Okay.
He was called the Atom just because he was a small guy.
Right.
And so
Makes
that was
sense.
kind of a nickname that was given to him.
Yeah.
And so when he became a hero, he just went by the name the Atom. Also here we are introduced to the Flash, the speedster.
Yeah, I should have thought about that one.
But this is not the Barry Allen Flash that most people are familiar with.
Okay.
But this Flash, I mean, if you watch the CW series, you were introduced to this Flash and saw him several times. And that was Jay Garrick. Jay Garrick is the Flash with the helmet.
Got
as
you.
most people will.
With the wings. Yeah.
Or like the Hermes looking helmet.
Right.
That was Jay Garrick. And then we also got Green Lantern was introduced in this Golden Age.
Okay.
But again, this is not the Hal Jordan Green Lantern that most people associate. This is Alan Scott. For those of you who have seen this version of the Green Lantern, he has a red suit with a purple cape, and he has just the single mask going across. But this was a different. His powers were just considered magical, not alien in nature.
Right.
But yeah, so we get all of these characters. I want to go back to Batman though.
Let's do that.
What do you think it was about? So we talked about what made Superman such a pivotal character at the time. What do you think it was about Batman?
Well, Batman was out there getting justice for the ones who couldn't get it for themselves, I think. And, it was kind of a little dark streak, a little bad boy. And, human nature. We kind of want to do the same thing too. Man, I feel like all the time, wish the cop was right there. Why can't I do something about that? Kind of attitude. So
yeah, no, I think that's what it was too, because I think it's the fact that unlike Superman, he was just a dude in a suit.
Yeah,
he didn't have superpowers.
Yeah, his powers were made by himself, or the company he worked, owned.
Yeah, he just used his own intellect, his own physical ability, of course, like you're talking about, his wealth.
Yeah,
to fight crime. So it was something that, like you said, he was probably more relatable than Superman was in that case. But yeah, I agree with that. Now, there's another character I haven't brought up yet because I wanted to kind of have a section just for him. So I'm going to ask you. So most superheroes at this time were just copies of Superman.
Okay.
But did you know, or do you know, which character who still exists today was so close to being like Superman that it forced DC to actually sue the company over this character? And this character still exists. There's been 2 movies starring this character. There was a television show back in the day on this character. This character still exists. Can you think of what character is so much like Superman that DC actually sued? It was Fawcett Comics. I'll give you a little bit of a hint if you know.
Doesn't help.
It was Fawcett Comics who created this character, and he was so close to Superman that DC actually sued. Do you know the character?
The greatest American hero. No. Seriously, nothing comes to mind, and I'm sure as soon as you say it, I'm going to like, oh yeah, I should have known that.
Yes.
Mercy.
Say his name and he will appear.
Yeah. Shazam?
Shazam.
Ah, see, there you go. Little hint.
Yeah. Of course, back then his name was Captain Marvel. Shazam was just the word that he said.
Right.
But the actual hero, he debuted in 1940 and actually outsold Superman in the 40s. Yeah, in 1944 alone, Captain Marvel sold 14 million comics.
That's incredible.
But like I said, DC did file a lawsuit on Fawcett. They went to trial in 1948, and the court did agree that he was an unlawful copy of Superman. But they pointed out that DC failed to register some of Siegel and Schuster's newspaper strips, which abandoned the copyright. And so Fawcett technically won.
Holy cow. What a way to win.
Yeah. But of course, DC would appeal it. and then after an appeal in 1952, the decision was reversed, and it was sent back to trial court for a determination of damages.
Okay.
So technically, DC ended up winning it, but Fawcett did settle with DC the following year in 53. And unfortunately, it did cause Fawcett to not only cancel Captain Marvel, but they also canceled all their other comics. So pretty much this lawsuit that DC put on Fawcett drove Fawcett out of business.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Did he ever come back with anything else, Fawcett?
Oh, yeah. It's just because... Oh, no. No, pretty much DC absorbed Fawcett, and that's why Captain Marvel now exists in the DC universe.
Okay.
Yeah, which would happen to other companies along this route. So you got major publishers, and let's talk about that a little bit. So you got Detective Comics, Action Comics. There was one, I believe, called Adventure Comics. You had Sensation Comics, which is where Wonder Woman came in. These were all individual publishers.
Okay.
But they would later all merge to become DC Comics.
That sounds about right, since DC is the one that everybody recognizes these days.
Yeah, and it was just like Timely Comics would be the company that would become Marvel Comics.
Okay.
But like I've said earlier, DC was really the one that dominated this market. Timely would introduce the characters of Namor and the Human Torch, not the one from the Fantastic Four. This was a android character.
Okay.
But with the same powers and all. And of course, they would introduce their biggest character, and he goes by the name of what?
Iron Man.
No, this was way before Iron Man. 1940s. 1940s. Who does Timely Comics introduce? You know, World War II is happening.
Sorry. Captain America.
Yeah, Captain America, the patriotic symbol of World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that we talked about the relationship between Superman and Captain Marvel. Before Captain America, there was a company called MLJ, and they introduced a character called the Shield.
Okay.
You've probably never heard of the Shield, but you can probably already see the connection here.
I see where it's going.
Yeah. So here's just a brief, for those of you who don't know who the Shield is, here's a brief little background to the character of the Shield. He is a chemist by the name of Joe Higgins. His brother has developed a formula for super strength and invulnerability. However, his brother is killed by the Germans, and his brother is framed for an act of terrorism that the Germans commit upon killing the brother. Joe, because he also is a chemist, he finishes the formula and discovers that it requires applying the chemical to certain body parts. So it's not just a simple injection.
Okay.
And those body parts are the sacrum, which if you're not aware is the bone at the base of your spine, the heart, the innervation, which is just the fancy word for nerves,
Okay.
the eyes,
Ouch.
the lungs, and the derma, aka the skin.
Right.
So let me go through that again. The sacrum, heart, innervation, eyes, lungs, derma. Which
Shield.
if you take the first letters of those, it spells shield. And he was a patriotic type character, and he carried a shield, and so some people think that he was Captain America was just a ripoff of him, but I couldn't find where there were any lawsuits involved there, so say what you will. But now we are in we're World War II.
Right.
So I will ask you again, how do you think the war influenced the stories that were being told in the comics? And how do you think the war actually, because you're thinking if we're saying the Golden Age started in 1938, you're looking at World War I starts in 41, or World War II, starts in 41.
Right.
So what was it about the war that kept comics going? So how do you think the war affected comics? And how do you think that the war kept the comics going?
Well,
Like, what do you think it was?
Not knowing exactly, again, I'm sure I'm going to learn a little bit here, but my guess would be that the stories of certain battles were told through the comics, and that's how certain, a certain group of people would get their information about the war, and that's how they found out what was going on in the war. Again, that's just my guess, and that's just what kept it going, is because people wanted to come back and hear how the war was going, and that's where they got their information.
Well, and another thing was comics were cheap. I mean, you're talking a dime.
Yeah.
They were portable. You carry them around with them. So that meant that they were very easy entertainment for the soldiers themselves.
Right. Okay.
You know, the soldiers could carry them, fold them up, put them in their back pocket. You know, when they were stuck in a certain location, that was their form of entertainment. I mean, we're talking the 1940s. You don't have, a phone. You don't have a TV. You don't have. I mean, this was the way that they were able to keep themselves entertained, was reading comic books. But I will say the same thing that you just said. But they also depicted these superheroes fighting against the Axis powers of World War II. I mean, are you familiar with what is happening on the cover of Captain America #1?
No, I can't say that I've seen that one.
He's punching Adolf Hitler.
Ah, well, there you go.
Yeah. So these comics were serving both as entertainment and, in essence, propaganda.
Of course. Yeah, because that's
yeah.
what we were doing. We were hitting Adolf and the Germans with our best shot.
Yeah, and here we have superheroes that are no longer fighting fictional villains. You know, like you said, we now are watching these superheroes take on the Nazis.
Right.
And we're getting stories that really felt timely and, impactful to our lives, which caused that just increase in morale, both in the home front. Here at home, we're reading about it. And, you got to think, a little boy, little girl that's reading the comic books, they actually probably even think that, Captain America is over there with, their uncle or their brother or their dad fighting the evil Nazis.
For sure.
It also gave them that sense of escapism. It allowed them to, even the ones that didn't have to do with the war, it allowed them to escape from the horror of World War II, I would say as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you step outside yourself for a little while and kind of immerse yourself in another storyline that's not what you're actually dealing with. That makes sense.
But unfortunately, after the war, there was a decline in superhero comics. And I'm saying it again, superhero comics. There was a decline in superhero. Why do you think there was a decline in superhero comics after the war?
Perhaps because we have now won the war and we don't need the superhero anymore.
Yeah, I think that kind of plays a part, because you're now looking at these real life soldiers, not superheroes. These soldiers are our heroes.
Yeah, they've returned as the victors.
Yeah, we didn't need these fictional, godlike characters who could have easily just ended the war.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Superman,
all bind up.
War over.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he's truly fighting for truth, justice, and the American way at the time, yeah, war over. So yeah, there was less interest in that. And then you're looking at soldiers didn't want to think about that stuff when they got home. So there was more increase in. There were still comic books, because comic books aren't just superhero stuff. You had crime comics. There were horror comics. There were romance comics, and those were starting to overtake the superhero. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't superhero-like characters. A very popular character at this time was the Spirit, created by Will Eisner. Are you familiar with the Spirit?
I've heard that name, but I can't say that I've seen anything about it.
Yeah, they made a movie a few years back. It wasn't great, but there is a Spirit movie. There's another one from like the 80s or early 90s that was like supposed to create a TV show. It also was not good. But the Spirit comic, I mean, he's an iconic character.
Right.
But yeah, the war completely changed people, and it changed the industry, which is, again, where we're talking here. So let me go through a list of some of these changes.
Okay.
So MLJ magazines, they had debuted Archie in 1941. Of course, everybody's familiar with
everybody
Archie.
knows Archie. Uh-huh.
Then after the war, Archie became such a big comic, because now that was something they were more interested in, relatable, teen, young 20s life. He became so big that MLJ changed their name to Archie Comics.
Oh, wow.
In 1946.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Then you had Dell Comics, who made a deal with Disney. You got to think, this is 1940s, so Disney is hitting the ground running,
right,
getting going on their success after following Snow White in 37. And so Dale Comics began producing Mickey Mouse comics and Donald Duck comics. And of course, eventually would create, for those of you who don't know, he was not actually a cartoon first. He was a comic first, and that's Uncle Scrooge.
Right, okay.
The Flash and Green Lantern that we talked about earlier, they were canceled in 1949. All-Star Comics, which was the home of the Justice Society of America, they decided to focus on Westerns and became All-Star Westerns. Star Spangled Comics was renamed Star Spangled War Stories. Sensation Comics, which is where Wonder Woman debuted, that entire brand was canceled in 1953. Wonder Woman, though, did have her own title at this point, so Wonder Woman kept going.
That's good.
But since Sensation Comics was canceled in 1953, Timely's Human Torch and Namor, those first two characters from Marvel, they were canceled in 49. And then Captain Marvel, Shazam, was canceled in 1953. Now, I will, for the people who are probably yelling at their phone or their device, yes, I know 1953 is technically getting into the Silver Age, but it is because of this impact that affected the Golden Age. So I did want to bring that in.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of wrap things up here. Are you aware of what put an end, or what many people say put an end to the Golden Age? Or again, your best guess.
My best guess would be we're right at the, let's see, the 50s.
So
53.
we're at the end of the 40s now.
Yeah.
We're right at the beginning of the 50s. So some time has passed since the war.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what events would have been happening around that time that...
So I will tell you the event is kind of comic specific, but I still think you might be able to. So I will throw this title at you. You may not be familiar
trying to
with
hone in on that one thing, yeah.
So a lot of people believe that it starts with a book that was written by psychiatrist Frederick Wertham in 1954 titled Seduction of the Innocent. What do you think that book was about?
Again, you got me. I don't know that I've ever even heard that title before. But they're probably putting things. The book probably had a lot of things that that generation would find inappropriate.
Well, and again, this wasn't a comic book. This was an actual book. But yes, it was in the book. Dr. Wertham was pretty much claiming that comic books were contributing to juvenile delinquency.
Yeah.
And so that led to the creation of what became known as the Comics Code Authority, which would impose strict guidelines on comic books.
Oh, wow.
So you probably remember like older comics would have this little seal on them that would say, authorized by the Comics Code Authority, and it had to have that seal. And it was, I will say, it was a self-governing community. Like, it was made up of people from the comic book industry, but they did impose strict guidelines. I mean, which really just kind of stifled the creators. They weren't able to do what they wanted to do, which of course then caused a decline in comics. And honestly, it sanitized the content to where honestly, comics at that time just became bland and boring because there was so much you couldn't do in comics anymore because they were worried.
More cookie cutter. Everybody's saying the same thing.
Yeah. But this is also why comics from that age are so valuable, because unlike the mass production that we really have now, you're talking about there were limited production then. It was hard to get a hold of stuff because you had to get them at the newsstand. And then now when this hits, this is one of those where parents are now snatching the comic books away from their kids. They are tearing them up. They're burning them, having the big burnings of like they've done before with books and records and all that throughout the ages. This was going after the comics. So there's very few comics from this era that survived. And so that's one of the reasons why they are so rare. But again, that's where many people believe the golden age came to an end.
Right.
Was the with the Comics Code Authority.
That sounds about right. Makes perfect sense.
So how did you feel about this kind of walk through the golden age to start off your history lesson?
My history lesson was very good. Thank you for sharing all that information with me. Again, a lot of the characters that we know and love today are still around, and that's good. Mm-hmm. but it's always good to go back and see where it all started.
Yeah.
And I like that. It's funny how you had so many different titles or, companies that were producing the different groups that somehow all came together under DC at the time. So that was that's nice to know.
Yeah, and again, even though it ends with the big challenge of the Comic Code Authority, as we know, comics would endure. Because, like you said, this is the age that left, honestly, a mark on popular culture, defining mark. The characters, as you said, would lay the foundation. Again, we call Superman Batman. If you are asked, I would say most people, even if they don't read comic books, if they're asked to name a superhero, I would bet 8 out of 10 people are either going to name Superman, Wonder Woman, or Batman. I don't care how popular the MCU is.
Yeah, they know those for sure.
Yeah, and of course we'd see the resurgence. Superheroes would come back with the Silver Age, which is what we'll get into next.
Okay.
But yes, Superman, Batman, or Wonder Woman would stay central figures. Again, like I said, comics did not start in this age, but it is the golden age that established comic books as a unique storytelling medium. It blended that visual art with a narrative in a way that hadn't been done before. And of course, its influence is evident in the popularity of the superhero stories, the appeal of the characters that we still have. And yeah, there you go. So there you have it.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
There is the golden age of comics, a time of creativity, innovation, the big cultural impact that we still feel today. And whether you're a lifelong fan or you're new to the world of comics, or you're someone like Reece who has always had an interest but may not know all the history, you still can't deny that this era, the golden age, laid the groundwork for the stories and the characters that we love.
I'd say that's about perfect, yes.
Well, thank you, Reece, for joining me on this journey through the golden age. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. In 2 weeks, we will discuss the Silver Age in the next one-shot. But we'll wrap things up here today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.